Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development will now come to order. We have 2 items scheduled for this agenda, and we'll begin by bringing up item number 2.
Item number 2, motion Cardenas, Reyes, Smith, relative to instructing the Board of Public Works and Bureau of Contract Administration to provide a status report on the first source hiring program to include the ability of the BCA to implement the program with existing resources and the development of program rules and regulations and related matters.
Anybody here to present on this matter?
Good morning, Councilman Cardenas. I'm Hannah Choi with the Bureau of Contract Administration. I'm sorry John couldn't be here, but we're here to give you a status on what's been going on. I have Mario Interiano, who's been working on the rules and regs, and we also have Sandy Garcia. And they'll be going over the timeline and what the status is to date and some of the recent developments in the automation of first source hiring program that we have been exposed to.
Okay. Automation, what system are you using?
We don't have a system yet, but staff recently participated in LAWA's interviews for hiring a contractor to do their first source hiring automation.
Okay, I'm sorry, your name again?
My name? Hannah Choi, C-H-O-I.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, Councilman. My name is Mario Interiano, and I've been working with Sandy Garcia to my right on developing the rules and regulations for the first source hiring ordinance. We have, I believe, in the last report that was given to you with respect to the timelines as to develop this or the rules and regulations, we had indicated that it would take us about 1 year with current staffing to develop these rules and regs. We have made some strides in developing these rules and regs. We're about 70% complete. However, where we run into a snag is really in the implementation aspect of the ordinance. Initially, we looked at trying to run this program on a paper-based system, which we believe that is very inefficient and counterproductive to all involved. So we started moving into exploring possibly a web-based system where employers and candidates alike would have real-time access to these job opportunities. But in doing so, we realized that it would require IT people within our bureau to develop this. And with current staffing, we're looking at maybe about 18-month implementation of this
18 months
program.
from when?
18 months from today, if we were to move forward with the web-based system.
And what were you saying you're 70% there on?
We are 70% on the development of the rules and regs. So in essence, we've pretty much gotten to the point where we've developed the definitions, the exemptions and whatnot that are called for within the ordinance. But what we're working on now is really on the actual implementation aspects of the ordinance. Mm-hmm. And again, as like I said, we really fell into or I should say we got to a point where we were looking at what would be the most effective way to implement this ordinance. And in looking at all of the possible options, we believe that this is probably best implemented if we go through a web-based system, whether it's developed through city or with city resources, or if we outsource just like LAWA is looking to do. Myself and Sandy Garcia sat in on RFP reviews for LAWA's request for proposals to hire a contractor to do this for them. And that really opened our eyes to see what options are available or what has been developed in the contracting community to provide the service. And it
could be in lieu of developing a web-based system?
Correct. And although LAWA's LAWA calls for a pilot program for 1 year, and it would affect only 100 contractors that work for LAWA. And in looking at that pilot program, contractors have been able to say that they can implement this within a 4 to 6 month period, at least the pilot program. And I think that it would be beneficial for the entire city to jump onto one system rather than having the city take one system and then have the proprietary departments develop their own systems, because it would, if we all go with one system, not only will you have the cooperation of the contractors, but also of the referral centers. And you're not necessarily impacting them as much by having to teach these referral centers or train the referral centers on different programs that would be customized for each individual proprietary department or council-controlled department.
At the interviews, LAWA was joined not by our own office, but DWP as well as POLA, because they're all looking to implement a web-based first source hiring program, and it makes sense to develop a global one that all contractors can go on to, and it would be a much better implementation. And they all agreed that we should do this together.
Well, it's one thing for proprietary departments in this big city to agree on something. It's another thing for them to come to fruition on how to actually implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the timeline for that? If we were to, if all the proprietaries in the city as a whole said, let's all work toward one system, what's the timeline for that?
I believe that LAWA, as I said, they are looking at maybe having a selected contractor possibly by the end of the year, and beginning on the pilot program possibly as early as next March. And contractors have indicated that they could, their time window would be about 4 to 6 months for implementation of a pilot program. And if the city can then piggyback on that pilot program, I believe that it's the timelines would be increased, or I should say shortened, to implement a similar pilot program for the city.
So you anticipate, based on what you just reported to this committee, that if in fact LAWA would stay on target with their timeline, and then the city would actually adopt that contractor instead of going out for a separate RFP process, that by the summer of '09, perhaps, we could have some activity where actual constituents are being served by this contractor?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, one of the things that makes it kind of interesting is LAWA, we have the right to piggyback on processes of proprietaries within the city and vice versa, and also from other governments as well. But how can we assure ourselves that LAWA is looking for a certain amount of capacity, and we would actually extend that capacity on this private contractor? How do we assure ourselves that this private contractor isn't going to get bogged down?
Part of the RFP process, or the RFP stated that contractors were to demonstrate a scalability of their product, and it was explained that it would not only service LAWA initially, but could potentially expand to other proprietaries as well as the city as a whole, being that all departments are looking to implement a similar program.
So expandability has already been communicated to those who participated in the RFP process.
That's correct, yes.
And you're sure about that?
Yes.
It's one thing for them to share with them, it's another thing for them to require them to demonstrate that in their proposal.
Well, they did speak to that. That was one of the things that the RFP called for, is their ability to scale upwards.
Okay. You mentioned about the rules and regulations. You say that they're about 70% complete. What's the timeline for that completion?
The, it really depends on whether we go on a web-based product or not, because
So you're on hold right now?
we're sort of on hold until we determine which would be the best option, whether we go with the paper-based system, a web-based system that again is developed in-house, or whether we outsource this. Because of the timelines that are involved, the paper-based system seems to be, again, the least efficient. The ordinance calls for a 7-day notice from the contractor before they go out to the and advertise to the public. With the current, I guess, staffing and I guess capabilities that not only our department has now, but as well as CDD, we don't believe that 7-day can actually happen for us to get back to the contractor and give the contractor a list of possible candidates.
Does anybody have an idea what the magnitude of the contract commitment would be in dollars?
Well, I can only tell you from what LAWA's RFP is at this point. Their pilot program is 100 contractors for the 12-month period, and they're looking at roughly about 300 to 400,000 for that first year. So, for the city, we're probably looking at 2 or 3 times the number of contractors. So I would say it's probably 2 or 3 times the number or the amount. So we're looking probably close to 900,000.
And where's that in the budget process, as far as you can tell?
I'm not sure.
It's nowhere in the budget process.
It's not accounted for yet. So that's something that is going to be brought to the legislative body, and then we'll have to decide how and where we're going to fund it from.
Yeah, because we didn't get additional staffing either for this ordinance.
So it's not within any department budget that you're aware of? Okay. Now, when it comes to providing opportunities for gang-involved youth or people who are formerly involved in gangs, how would that be addressed in this new process?
Well, we envision working with the work source centers, and the work source centers would have access to this web-based system, where and again, just looking at what was presented to us in the last few days, the work source centers would be able to provide access to these individuals, where these individuals can be rated in a sense, and then be specially or given priority when being referred to our contractors. So long as the candidates complete the questionnaires, and it is indicated that they would be receiving priority because they are of a high-risk nature, then those individuals would be first to be referred to the contracting community.
Now, in anticipation of this going forward, regardless of its paper-based, web-based, contractor, what is the capacity of potential jobs in this system?
Oh, I think the capacity is tremendous in the sense that because if we go on a web-based system, it's immediate. Contractors, once they have a need or identify a need, they can log on and they would see a list of potential candidates.
But we're looking for dozens of people a year going through this system and hopefully and potentially receiving jobs, or hundreds, or potentially thousands?
I would say hundreds, because again, it's an instant process. Not only would the candidates have to go, they can access this information from the work source centers, they can access them from home even, or even from our public libraries if they don't have access to a computer.
So on an outside figure, as far as the number of contractors in the database or in this referral-based system would be in the hundreds citywide?
Yes.
So that being the case, we may be anticipating that some contractors may never end up hiring some of these folks, but some contractors may get used to it and hire quite a handful of.
Right. The idea is if we make this system so that it's beneficial for the contractor and it really becomes a true first source, they'll see that there's a benefit to them. They don't have to necessarily spend their resources on trying to do, take all the necessary steps to find a qualified candidate. So if the city is providing these qualified candidates up front, they know exactly where to go, and it reduces their time and definitely the value, which we would hope that at some point contractors, even if they don't have a city contract, would still continue utilizing the resource to fill any positions outside of our city contracting.
Okay. Now, when it comes to, are you working with the Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development in terms of coordinating efforts to outreach and work with youth and families impacted by violence, basically those communities?
No, we have not, to my knowledge, have approached them yet. We're right now working with the city attorney's office on the language, and I'm sure once we are further into the development, we will be working with them.
Yeah, because you wouldn't be working with CDD like in the old days. Now you'd be working with the Mayor's
Right.
Office. Okay. When do you anticipate doing that? At what point?
Fairly soon.
So, I mean, what are you waiting for? You're waiting for certain language back from the city attorney's office. You're waiting for, January 1st.
Well, one of the things that we need to do is, because the ordinance does call for CDD's involvement in providing the qualified candidates, or actually the way that we were envisioning CDD's involvement would be as a filtering process where CDD would approve certain work source centers to be able to log on to the system. Mm-hmm. Once they have been approved and they begin to send potential candidates, CDD can be also a filtering agent before these candidates are sent over to potential employers. But again, if we outsource and looking at the capabilities that are available through outside programs, this whole filtering process can be done automatically. It's automated, so it would reduce or minimize the role of CDD in the implementation of the ordinance.
Okay. When it comes to the current economy and municipal projects and things of that nature, are we anticipating that they are hopes for success maybe a few years ago might be a little diminished just because of the nature of what's going on out there in the labor force and the demand for labor or the reduction in demand of labor?
We believe that it definitely is impacted. The program would be impacted. And of course, as the economy improves, and of course there's more opportunities available. But I think so long as the city is providing opportunities to the contracting community as a result would also be giving those same opportunities to the city's constituency.
I'm going to make two announcements before I ask if there's anybody here to speak on item number 2 to this committee. We don't have any public comment cards filled out for item number 2. Is there anybody here to speak on this item that we're hearing at this moment, which is item number 2? Seeing and hearing none, public comment on item number 2 is now closed. With that, what we'll do, the committee will recommend that the motion be amended to instruct the Bureau of Contract Administration to report to the committee every 60 days until the program is fully implemented, and also that this item will be held over for 1 week to address questions by additional members of this committee. Specifically, Councilmember Reyes couldn't be here today, but he has a litany of questions that he'll be contacting you to speak to you about. Hopefully you can get those questions resolved and to his satisfaction when we hear this matter next week. Okay?
Okay, good.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'll move to item number 1.
Item number 1, communication from Councilmember Tony Cardenas and motion Cardenas, Smith, Rosendahl, Perry, relative to findings as contained in the Los Angeles County Commission on Human Relations 2007 hate crime report and related matters.
Good morning, Councilmember Cardenas.
Morning.
My name is Robin Toma. I'm Executive Director of the LA County Human Relations Commission. Seated to my left is the Chief Deputy Director, Richard Virtus. To his left is Ray Regalado, who is the coordinator of our Hate Crime Victim Assistance and Advocacy Initiative. To my right is Tony Massengale, who is the coordinator of our Racialized Gang Violence Prevention Initiative. I actually have a PowerPoint this morning that I thought might help us in covering the terrain that we want to cover in terms of hate crimes and the findings and related to LA City and gangs. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to respond to your request to present here today on this important topic. This report, the hate crime report, we've been doing for over 25 years, longer than any other jurisdiction in the United States. And we are actually recognized by the Harvard University Kennedy School as an exemplary practice for human relations commissions.
Are the feds rewarding you with any grants for your stellar and longevity in this area?
Not yet, but we're hopeful that in the coming years that the federal government will be more supportive of our efforts around race relations and hate crime.
Well, in order to do this work, it does cost money, right? I mean, you're not all volunteers.
Absolutely. And, we have been fortunate to count on the support of the County Board of Supervisors. We have grown over the years, although I think need has outpaced our growth. But we have been able to grow this report into something where we can get data from 46 police agencies around the county, including the LAPD Sheriff's Department, and spend a significant amount of our staff time to analyze it to be able to provide the county and cities with the kind of information they can use to help more effectively prevent and address all sorts of hate crime. So why don't I just tell you that it's not just the LAPD and the police agencies that we get their actual individual hate crime reports, which we then take, we analyze, and we input into our database. We also, knowing that there's underreporting, there are groups that don't go to the police department. They may go to a community-based organization. We also get it from the Anti-Defamation League, the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, the Coalition for Humane Immigrants' Rights of Los Angeles, and a variety of other partners we have. We also ask the school district police agencies, such as LAUSD Police, who may report or cover a hate crime, investigate a hate crime that is not reported to the LAPD as well. So we try to be as comprehensive as possible in picking up the different sources where hate crime reports could be submitted. And then the truth is that even though this gets the bulk of attention, we actually, and we spend a lot of time on it, we spend more time on what we're doing to address the hate crime. That is focusing on high schools, 5 model high schools where we're developing human relations programs. We have a racialized gang violence prevention initiative where we're focused on helping cities to organize themselves in a way that are going to get at the root causes of the hate crime and gang violence. And we also have hate crime victim assistance programs such as the one that Ray coordinates as well that gives direct assistance and community education that's culturally specific to those communities where not only are they victims of hate crimes, but they're also perpetrators of hate crimes in all communities.
When it comes to schools, you're saying you're working in some schools, and hopefully that'll expand, but are you working with the schools specifically on curriculum-based activity or adjunct to the curriculum requirements of that campus?
It's both. We recognize that in order for any kind of meaningful change to happen at a high school, there has to be the institutionalization, the embedding of human relations into its core programs. So there needs to be curriculum that is influenced, that teachers are adapting to address the issues. There has to be clubs that are supported by the school and that develop student leadership. There has to be parent involvement, teacher training, community collaboration. All of those elements are what we call our zero-hour model of human relations work in schools. So yes, that's a big part of it. Turning to this, I just want to, obviously the headline here was that...
Can you clarify something? I think the average American doesn't understand how technical the term of hate crime is. For example, I don't mean to try to get laughter out of this, but I think your average American would think that if a hate crime is something generic and it just means that a crime was committed with vigor, or a crime was committed where somebody says, I hate you.
Right.
If somebody says, I hate you, and they hit somebody, is that a hate crime for this categorical?
No, it is not. It has to have something more than that. You have to have the underlying crime, and then you have to have a motivation. Not just, it doesn't have to be hatred per se. It could be bias, prejudice. It could be resentment. It could be something less than hate. But if it's basically singling out a person because of their race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender, or disability, those bases are the legal bases for police and prosecutors to pursue a hate crime in California. Federally, actually, sexual orientation, gender, and disability are not part of it.
But in California, they are.
California, in many states, it is.
Okay, so when it comes to a federally recognized or California recognized hate crime, a crime recognized as a hate crime, for example, if somebody were to take out a gun and shoot at somebody, and they were to say, blurt out the fact that they think they're of a certain gang affiliation and shoot at them, is that considered categorically a hate crime for these as we're discussing on this item?
No, it would not make it
okay,
a
but
hate crime.
If that same incident and somebody were to do the same thing, but at the same time they blurt out perhaps the person, what they think the person's race is or what have you, in the midst of that crime or that shooting, would that be a hate crime for the purpose that we're speaking of at this moment?
Yes, that would make evidence for it to be categorized as a hate crime and at least subjected to investigation. I will say that in your first example, there are situations in neighborhoods where even where there is no racial epithet shouted out during the course of a crime, if there's a history of a gang targeting another racial group, then it may not be necessary on that one instance for that to be uttered if there is that kind of pattern and practice by that gang. So it depends on context. But generally speaking, in an isolation, that description would not end up being investigated as a hate crime.
Now, hate crimes, especially for the purposes of the statistics you're showing today, we tend to be focusing on hate crime, whether or not something can be categorized or will be categorized as a hate crime, more in crimes of violence, rather than, for example, what we consider in this country as white-collar crimes. Correct?
If there's a crime that there's evidence of a motivation underlying
I'm
it.
not talking about theoretically.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what are we tending to document for the purposes of what you're showing me today, the numbers, the figures, the incidents that we are labeling within LA County, at least the ones that we've been able to identify within
Right.
LA County as hate crimes. They're mostly crimes of violence, aren't they?
The crimes of violence and crimes against property, for example, graffiti and vandalism, are also a big portion of it. Assaults, aggravated assault, simple assault, some attempted murders are also part of it. White-collar crime, like embezzlement, fraud, very, very rare. In fact, I can't recall ever when that was reported as a hate crime.
Thank you for extending it from very rare to you really don't even know when and if we've ever categorized one of them. And I'll give you an example. Say you have a very popular situation that has been happening over the last 5 or 6 years right under our noses, and it's not until the economy changed and the real estate market is somewhat in collapse as a former real estate broker, I'll use those terms. Say you have a lending firm where they committed a lot of these violations that are probably going to be coming out in the near future when the feds or whoever's jurisdiction it is, they start raiding those places and looking at their files and realizing the reason why they have such a delinquency rate through the roof is because they were not engaging properly in their fiduciary and legal responsibilities in their lending practices. And then they find that 70-80% of those files where the lending practices have been, the law has been violated on those files. And 70-80%, for example, may be of Hispanic origin. Would they then say, wait, there's some hate crime here? Because they focus, but remember what you said about gangs. If there's a proven pattern that their activity involves targeting people because of their race, for example, yet at the same time you have a white-collar situation where it turns out after they review, say, 1,000 files, and they realize that 700 and some of those files where they realize that there's all kinds of violations of their legal responsibilities as licensed brokers and also as fiduciary responsibilities for disclosure, in which there's tremendous evidence that they did not do that. Therefore, they committed crimes by and large.
Yeah, and that would be an example of racially discriminatory practices. And I think the difference between that and a hate crime would be that in the case of a gang situation, you'd have to prove that the lenders did it with some racial hostility towards that group. In other words, they wanted to somehow put that group in a worse position. And if they did it with that kind of animus, and there was some evidence of that, then I think the hate crime part would kick in. But it's still actionable under civil rights laws for violation of rights under, our nation's and our state's civil rights laws. If you're targeting a group and you're discriminating against them, taking advantage of them because you think that you can, make a greater profit, and that collapse, and you violate the law in the process.
You actually helped make my next point, because I could see conceivably that in the near future we're going to see cases like this where they targeted, for example, Spanish-speaking or non-English-speaking, a particular group. They advertised to them, they encouraged them to come in, they systematically left out proper explanation, disclosure, etc. And, for example, none of the documents were in their native language. They're all in English.
Right.
Then I would think that there would be a case for somebody to say they specialized in going after a certain clientele so that their practices could be consistent, and therefore they could get them to sign on the dotted line and also get these transactions over with and move on to the next one, the next one, the next one, because they developed a pattern of realizing that these people, by and large, are not going to be aware of saying, hold on a minute, what does this mean? What does that mean?
And those practices are, really reprehensible, and obviously are taking advantage of communities' language barriers and other, cultural issues, and just targeting them because they believe they're less likely to report such violations. I think the thing about hate crimes, is that even where there might be a crime of opportunity, so that even where maybe somebody is targeted because they think that they're less likely to report the crime because maybe they assume that they're immigrants, that in and of itself wouldn't be enough under our current state law to prosecute as a hate crime. There'd have to be some indication that there's racial animosity or hostility towards that person.
So that would have to be evidenced in the incident in and of itself to come to that conclusion and label it a hate crime. Or, again, as you said earlier, that particular perpetrator would have to have some kind of pattern, and then therefore that would be brought to bear as part of the case.
Right.
Or the charges, I should say.
Right. Just to mention that there have been a number of cases in which that line between what might be gang activity and racialized hate crime or hate crime is often blurry and unclear, and sometimes law enforcement will not report it. When there was a series of targeted attacks on Latino immigrant workers, lone workers leaving work at night by African-American youth that were in many cases affiliated to a gang, and sometimes mentioned as part of a gang initiation rite, they targeted these lone workers leaving their jobs at night, that was picked up as a pattern, and the police department, Pasadena, started to go after those gangs and also educate some of the Latino immigrant workers about that situation. But because
Are the crimes labeled hate crime or not?
well, they ended up submitting very few as hate crimes because they believed they didn't have enough evidence in many cases to justify it. And this is something that I think is a gray area where, people of goodwill will disagree on that kind of categorization. But we actually discuss it in our hate crime report because that is not atypical of how many law enforcement agencies deal with that line. Let me just, I want to be able to share with you some of the information about LA County and the city in particular that will be, I think, helpful. You can see that the big headline here is that it went up to 763 hate crimes in 2007 on the far right.
And that starts, your chart starts in 1980?
Right, and that's before there were even hate crime laws on the books in California. So in the 80s, you'll see that there was a maturation of the reporting period, of the reporting system.
But in 1980, there were federal hate crime laws, just not state.
No, there were no federal hate crime laws either.
When did the hate crime laws come into being when it came to the feds?
I believe it was in the late 80s or 90s. Mm-hmm. They were behind. California was a leader on hate crimes laws in the country. So and it doesn't mean that hate crimes didn't exist. They certainly were committed.
Across the country. I just don't want people to think that this is a California issue.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
It doesn't mean that hate crimes didn't exist across the country.
Oh, yeah. No, and it doesn't mean it didn't exist across the world. I mean, it's part of human history. But we are the first state that began to identify it as a particular problem that warranted a different remedy than just ordinary crime. And so you can see in the 90s there was the maturation of the reporting system, which I think I would credit LAPD being one of the key agencies that really helped to collaborate and develop hate crime policies and reporting systems that are in many ways exemplary for law enforcement. You can see that we peaked in 2001, which was the September 11 terrorist attacks and the aftermath, where there was a lot of targeting of all sorts of people, but particularly targeting Muslims and Middle Easterners and those who might appear to be of those groups.
Well, I think even though there's a spike, I think it reminds us, thinking back of the mindset and the unfortunate fervor that was going across the country, in Los Angeles and California is no exception. I think that spike still proves that the underreporting is tremendous.
Absolutely. In fact, it was documented. It's something everyone always knew anecdotally, but the Justice Department actually commissioned a study in 2005 and found that through interviewing thousands of people and comparing it to law enforcement reports, found that it was 24 to 28 times underreported in the country. So I think that number would be less for LA County and for this California because we've been so far ahead of training law enforcement to report it and talking to communities about it. But that just tells you that this number is, way underneath the number that would actually be hate crimes out there.
Let me help understand what you just said. According to that study or that process where they asked all those questions, they found that it was as much as 24 to 28 times underreported, which means if you have a community that was typical of that report and they had 100, it's very likely that it could be upwards of 2,000 incidents, even though the amount documented and reported was only 100.
Correct. Wow. And this is the gap between the victims reporting to police and then police reporting it to the FBI. So those two steps, that's how many reports are not, or hate crimes are not reported in those two steps, lost along those two steps, I should say. And I think I would point out that there are many states in this country that have very weak or no hate crime laws and report regularly 0 hate crimes each year to the Justice Department.
New York. Would Mississippi be one of those states?
I haven't checked the numbers lately, but
New York is one of those states.
State of New York?
No, the state of New York doesn't. I'm just certain the state of New York reports hate crimes.
0. think in the last.
No, you
I
know what
wouldn't- I
probably
would-
happens in New York? I can bet you the city of New York City probably reports hate crimes, but the state of New York has not adopted themselves. They haven't adopted the practice of it being their responsibility to report statewide hate crimes. I can bet you that's the case in New York, because I see two of you saying, wait a minute, New York yes, New York no, but Ray seems to believe that the
Richard.
state of New York, so you may have been privy to some information coming out of New York, and I can bet you it was New York City, not the state of New York.
It's true that the state is the one responsible for reporting to the FBI. So there's another gap that could go between.
But it doesn't preclude a big city like New York for doing their own thing.
Right.
And trying to do the right thing and figuring out, hey, what's going on here? How much hate crime activity do we have?
Right. And our system is so decentralized in this country in terms of law enforcement.
Well,
Ultimately,
there's no mandate by the feds that we do accumulate this kind of reporting, correct?
No, there is. There is a mandate that every agency report who gets, in every state, every city does have to report. So that's why I say there are lots of zeros. They have to report, but they can report zero.
They have to report what they feel that so
they
they
occurred.
comply.
They comply by
filling
submitting
out
a
form
report
or
that
putting
says
in a
zero.
report. But even if it says zero, the feds don't come back and say, you need to do better than that.
Not at this point.
I don't think that's been a,
Obviously not.
you know, that's not has not been a focus, I should say, of
So
our
it's a request
our
from the
government.
federal government, it's not a requirement.
No, it's a mandate. You have to report. There's no mandate there's nothing to ensure that the reporting is accurate. In other words, there's no type of follow-up that goes to those communities and says, how could it be that you have zero hate crimes? Are you actually training your officers in hate crime, a detection and investigation? Because if you don't, then of course, if you never ask the question whether this was hate involved, then even hate crimes could end up not be reporting as such. They're just crimes. And so it requires training and education and outreach to the communities that are most affected, because those who are often most targeted are often the ones with least confidence and the least strong relationships with law enforcement. So that's why there have been federal government support, and including to our county, for the partnerships that we have. But I think that the money is, quite limited, and if you just look at the number of states and communities that report zero, and I will mention that there are many cities in LA County that still report zero or few hate crimes in places that
Do you put out
strain,
every year?
credulity.
Do you put it in your report every year?
We have,
By city reports?
we
Not reports, but the city by city.
actually analyze it by SPA region, the Service Planning Area Councils.
Why don't you, since you're getting figures from each city, I presume, within your county, why don't you put out a table of
Sometimes what's happened is that cities that have been very good at reporting and are neighboring cities that are very poor at reporting, they end up inadvertently getting punished because that city that does a good job in reporting honestly ends up appearing to be a hate crime cluster or hotspot, whereas the city right next to them that may be experiencing a similar amount of hate crime and doesn't report it honestly ends up coming out looking good. And so we are working with those cities to be, and I say this is a very common problem with many cities, not just in LA County, I'm certain it's throughout California and through the country, that they tend to run from it. Part of it is that if the federal government had resources that they can provide and say, if you are reporting hate crime and you show a high level, we can provide funding for it, it changes the way people report. And so that's a big challenge we have. For example, I was just part of a training video developed by the POST, the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission for California, in which LAPD had a representative, the Sheriff's Department had a representative. And in those discussions, it was clear that LAPD has many policies and practices that are of the more advanced. And the hope is that by transmitting that through POST and by sharing that you'll have smaller departments who can learn and implement some of those same approaches. But it is a continual challenge, and sometimes the police departments actually resent smaller ones resent having to or seeing other larger departments as models, and there's a lot of can be pettiness among police departments. But it is a major area that we need to focus on is training of law enforcement. This is just a map of LA County of hate crimes that were reported from 2003 to 2007, the past 5 years. And so this is just to emphasize that what's happening in terms of hate crime isn't just a problem of LA City, but it's a problem of the entire county. And if you looked carefully, you could see that the places where there aren't many dots, it usually is because there are no people living there. Mountainous regions, deserts, areas that are not, populated. There are other places that are maybe highly industrialized and, therefore less dense. But over 5 years, that just gives you a sense of the breadth and the spread of hate crimes in the county. That are reported, yes. And then the question is, who is most targeted for hate crimes in the county? And this past year, 2007, it was consistent with past years in terms of African Americans always being the largest group. They're at the top, consisting of 39% of the total of reported hate crime targets, and that's over 4 times their rate in the population, which is about 9%. The next largest group is the gay and lesbian community, which is about 15% of all hate crime. And then it's anti-Jewish hate crime, that's about 10% of all hate crime. Next is anti-Mexican and anti-Latino general hate crime, and together, if you combine them, that's over 15%, and that would become the second largest targeted group for hate crime after African Americans. Following them, whites, then Asian Pacific Islanders, Armenians, Christians, transgendered persons, Middle Easterners, Chinese, Catholic, and it goes on. And the list actually cuts off. There are many groups that are targeted for just 1 or 2 hate crimes that are not included on this list, but it just goes to prove the point that nearly every community is affected by hate crime, and that the diversity of our communities is unfortunately also reflected in the diversity of our hate crime victims. If you look at one point to make in the previous one, if you look at the groups which had a percentage change that was larger than our overall 28% increase, that would be African Americans, Latinos, whites, Asian Pacific Islanders, and transgendered. They experienced increases above 28% in 2007. As you might expect, hate crimes committed because of prejudice based on one's race, ethnicity, or national origin, what we call racial hate crime for shorthand, is the largest type of hate crime by far. About 70% of all hate crime falls in that category, and it's been growing over the past years. Next is homophobic hate crime, which is about 14% of the total, and religious bigotry is the motive for about 13%. And that pattern is similar for not only California, but for the city as well. The city has a similar pattern where the largest category is race, national origin, ethnicity-based hate crime, and then comes sexual orientation and religion and gender. Okay, here's the first of a series of customized analyses about the city itself, where we break it down by the LAPD bureaus. So what you can see here is that the Valley Bureau, which had the highest number of all hate crimes reported, also had the highest number of race, ethnicity, national origin hate crime reported, also had the highest number of religious-based hate crime. But if you look at sexual orientation-based hate crime, the West Bureau had the largest number. Here's actually the breakdown in terms of all the numbers, and it's hard for it to be seen from this distance, but just to show you that we break down each of the bureaus by each of the divisions, Central, Hollenbeck, Newton, Northeast, Rampart for Central, et cetera. And what it tells you is that you can pick up certain patterns within the bureaus. For example, that we see that if you look at the South Bureau, we see hate crime by race being the largest in the southeast area. But if you look at sexual orientation hate crime, it's the largest in the southwest area of that division, of that bureau. And now, we looked at the issue over the past 3 or 4 years about hate crimes committed by gang members. And what we found in 2007 is that the actual number of gang-involved hate crimes in 2007 increased by 14%. and that gang members were identified as suspects in 120 of this total 763 hate crimes. So 16% of all hate crimes involve a gang member suspect. If you looked at race, ethnicity, national origin-based hate crime, then you have a little higher number, 21% of gang members, 1 of 5, were identified as suspects in those crimes. Now that's down, the good note is it's down from 23% in 2006. This gives you a little bit of context about what's been happening in the past several years. You can see the line at the top is telling us the total number of hate crimes from 2003, and then below, the red line tells you the number of hate crimes involving gangs. You can see that number dipped in 2004, but has risen since then and is now 120, so it is actually nearly double what it was 5 years ago in 2003.
About 20% of the total reported hate crimes? 18%
Yes,
maybe?
yes, fairly consistently. Just so you're clear, we're not including in this count a report by a witness or a police officer or a victim that the person who they believe committed the hate crime had a shaved head, had baggy pants, had non-gang tattoos. There has to be something much more specific and clear that it's connected to a gang. Most cases, suspects admit their gang affiliation, or the names of the gangs are in the graffiti they leave or in the tattoos they have on their body, or they have a prior history of being connected to a gang. Gang-involved hate crime is 79% violent compared to 75% in 2006. That increase is connected to increases in cases of aggravated assault and robberies. Aggravated assaults increased to 24 to 43, and robberies from 4 to 13. And the 2 attempted murders that were reported in 2007 involved gang member suspects. Now, this chart points out that one of the prominent features we have been picking up on is, in our numbers, is that Latino black hate crime is a big chunk of the racial hate crime we're seeing. And so, looking at this, you'll note that there's far more Latino and black hate crime than there is black on Latino, which is the second column. And it's important to note that at the same time, Latinos make up 47% of the county population, so and African Americans 9%. So to some degree, there's proportionality in the level of activism because you just have greater numbers of Latinos. But you can also see by this that the majority of hate crime between blacks and Latinos is not gang-related. The purple or the burgundy part of those bars is the non-gang related hate crime. And you can see that the black area is the gang-related, and that's a much smaller part, less than the majority of the hate crime that is committed between those two groups.
Now that is 2007 figures?
Yes.
And that's on the rise over 2006, 2005?
Yes, numerically, it is on the rise.
Both categories,
Yes.
gang and non-gang related.
Yes.
Now, that being the case, what do you think that rise is attributed to? And then also, what kind of recommendations do you have, or does your department make recommendations? You just gather data.
No, we more than that, we act on it. What we think is behind it is, and I think this is.
How do you think we can improve it?
I think one of the things that is happening is that even though hate crime and racial targeting by gangs is a minority of gang crime overall, it is true that the majority of gang crime is still Latino on Latino, black on black, Asian on Asian, etc. But where it is occurring, it is concentrated. It is a real phenomena, and it affects and impacts those communities. And so what we think is happening is that in those areas where there is racialized gang violence and the number of hate crimes is significant, that there has not been, the usual strategies have not been successful. That the suppression, the intense suppression efforts, which are necessary to calm things down, are clearly inadequate to really prevent the phenomenon from reemerging. That you can take all the gang members off the streets, and you'll have new ones take their place, either by being recruited over time, or from coming out of the system, prison system, or simply the fact that dynamic has an impact on the broader community. And so the fact that non-gang members are targeted starts to spread across to the whole community, and there's animosity that exists, and and can get expressed in hate crime by non-gang members. So the emphasis has to really be broader than just the suppression action. It has to have a much broader approach, and that approach has to be more sustained. Unlike suppression efforts, you can't just come in and set up a wonderful summer program and think that you've solved the problem that's going to get young people out and not be involved with gangs and give them alternatives. Unless those programs are sustained, there are job opportunities, educational tracks, and youth programs in a sustained way, and help for the families that are dealing with it, then our experience is that this whole phenomena of gang violence, and particularly racialized gang violence, is not going to turn.
Okay, you just pointed out that what I perceive as the vast majority of resources thrown at these kinds of issues are suppression resources. And what you just described to me is that needs to be augmented or complemented with intervention, prevention type resources, counseling resources, those kinds of resources, correct?
Absolutely.
Now, that being the case, are we, as a county, or as you can see in local governments within the county, are we shifting at all, or are we pretty much stagnant on the ratio of resources that we're throwing at the issue?
I think that while there is
I
movement,
don't know what the answer is from my perspective. I want to hear what you see.
I think while there has been some important movement, and right now there are a number of county departments that have been discussing and meeting from time to time about the gang, reorienting the county's approach to gang violence, we're certainly not there. And it's still in the planning phases. We, on the level of our Human Relations Commission, Tony and Richard and Ray, all in their respective areas, are working with cities and county departments to try to bring jobs, to try to bring county resources to those communities. But, and as well as the community-based organizations and nonprofits. But we have a long ways to go. And there's no question that at this level of investment, it is inadequate. That we would fully expect that this current year, that the number of hate crimes would increase unless there was a real step up in the investment made in our highest need families in communities afflicted by gangs.
Now does your do you and the people you work with in the county, do you make recommendations to the policy makers in the county as to the future shifts that you would recommend in resources, or which departments to engage or not? For example, I see that at the county level, but let me point out, I'm not trying to attack the county. The city of Los Angeles spends upwards of $1.3 billion on the police department. And they tend to engage by and large in suppression efforts, not necessarily, they cooperate and perhaps are given some roles, minute roles in intervention prevention efforts. But by and large, 98 to 99% of that money that goes to the police department, of upwards of $1.3 billion, is used for support of and or directly suppression. On the other hand, outside of the police department, we're probably expending maybe $20+ million. Let's just say it's close to $30 million or so, give or take, on prevention. And up until this year, we were only spending about $3.5 million formally on intervention. Now we're hopefully closer to $10 million, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, when it comes to the county, let me give you an example of two different departments. The DA's office, engaging with resources in and around this issue. And when you look at the public defenders, who gets more resources to be involved in this issue? The DA's office or the public defenders? Outside of prosecutorial matters in the courtroom. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure of the answer to that question. I have a guess, but I really don't know the answer to that
Well,
question.
one department is tremendously larger than the other, right? The DA's office is tremendously larger than the defense.
The public defenders and, yeah, the alternate public defenders.
Now, that being the case, are you precluded from making recommendations along
No.
those lines, or are
No,
you
and-
allowed to? Do you get admonished when you do? Are you told that's not your business?
No, in
Show
fact,
us the numbers.
We have been directly involved with a number of the board offices who have been really focused on the Supervisor Burke's office, for example, took the lead in calling the attention of the board to the Advancement Project report on the gang issue, and has also pushed to have the county departments develop a new approach informed by that report on the way we deal with gangs. We're part of strategic planning discussions, where we raise the issue. And I think that there is currently a motion before the board, and there's a plan to establish a committee with a variety of departments, including ourselves, to be part of a gang focus. And that it's moving a little slowly right now. There's been a lot of holdups, but there are definitely a number of key players within the county. Ourselves, I think there are parts of probation that are very anxious to see this happen. A number of other departments, and including some of the social service departments, that would like to see more emphasis on this. But it is it's a large government with unfortunately things sometimes don't move as quickly as we'd like.
Are you familiar with the Shift Cardenas Act, the state
Absolutely.
legislation?
Yes.
Have you ever looked at how the county, the convening body of folks headed by the probation officer, the county councils, how they tend to express to the state how they'd like to expend those funds? Have you looked into that at all?
What I'm familiar with is that the probation department I think it seemed to have the vast majority of those funds.
Yeah.
And I think that, one of the challenges right now that we're going through with the restructuring of the county administration is that there's now a public safety cluster of departments where probation sits with the sheriff's department and the DA's office, the public defenders. And then
Public defender's office is included in those meetings?
In the public safety collaborative, in the public safety cluster, yes, and others, all the fire department, alternate public defender, et cetera. We are part of the Children's and Families Wellbeing cluster, along with Department of Public and Social Service, et cetera. And so this new gang committee would bring together departments from different clusters to address it. The other place where this goes on to some degree is the Countywide Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, and that is a body chaired by one of the supervisors that is made up largely of law enforcement representatives. We're also one represented on it, and they have, as part of it, the Interagency Gang Task Force.
You're part of that? And
we're part of that. That has been chaired by actually one of the LA city attorney staff, Marty Vranikar, for many years. So there sometimes are arenas where we discuss and try to formulate positions, policies, and actions around these issues. But I think that the general answer to your question for me is that we firmly believe we, as the county, need to do much more on our own and in collaboration with cities to strengthen gang prevention and intervention resources for our communities. Because in our experience, that is what is missing in the vast majority of communities. And that's something we're really happy to work with you all. And just to mention, we have worked with the City Human Relations Commission, the Juvenile Justice Task Force with your very own Michael De La Rocha, who was spearheading that effort, was a key opportunity for us to model how the city and county can work together, addressing gang violence and race relations issues among our youth, without having to wait for there to be some kind of formal partnership at higher levels. We saw the need, we worked together, we pulled in community-based nonprofits, school districts, officials, a whole variety of people, and through that, there have been some important changes made at schools and in communities involving parents and in middle schools and in key efforts to really address this problem at its roots. And I think that's the kind of collaboration I think that we need to do more of and to support. And that's something that we've been trying to support on our county end. I know the City Human Relations Commission tried to get support, and we're actually going to be honoring them with our Human Relations Award in October for the exemplary work they've done.
Now, you are a policy department. You're not an implementer of program.
We're actually not limited. We are considered to be all of the above. I mean, in the sense that we are asked...
You are given resources to actually put programs out on the streets?
To some limited extent. And it's, of course, become more limited in this current budget environment. But, for example, the Racialized Gang Violence Prevention Initiative, the board voted to give us additional funding to hire Tony Massengale. We have shifted other staff to support his work there, and some small amount of program funds. The same with the Hate Crime Victim Assistance Advocacy Initiative. We have contracted with 7 community-based organizations, and Ray has been coordinating that initiative, and that's funded. That was been funded to probably to the tune of about $250,000 per year.
Now, Tony and Ray work under you?
Yes.
Now, what did you do, Tony, before you started working in this new system? And Ray, what did you do before you started working under this system?
I joined the county June 1st of last year to head up this Racialized Gang Violence Prevention Initiative. And prior to that, I spent about 16 years essentially self-employed, working as a community organizer, specializing in gang intervention and youth development. So I've been in the field quite a while. We're attempting to develop a new model for just heading off this crescendo of racialized gang violence. Right now it's hovering around 10% of gang-related crime and violence, and we don't want it to get any higher, and we want to push it back down because it has all kinds of implications, particularly when non-gang members are victimized and involved. So we've launched a pilot in Pasadena, Altadena, to begin to craft the model. But
Is that where you're from?
I actually live in Pasadena, Altadena.
And that's where you did your street work?
Say it again.
Is that where you did your street work?
I have not done street work since the 80s. I was assistant director in charge of field operations for an organization called Community Youth Gang Services, which at that time was formed through a joint powers agreement between the city and the county, launched in 1981. I joined the staff in 83 and worked through 88 and had countywide responsibility for 120 staff that delivered gang intervention and prevention services.
They did street work.
Say it again.
They did street work.
They did street work, and occasionally I did some special things along that line as well. But I don't call myself an interventionist as such. I'm a community organizer by training, and just happen to have specialized in focusing on that particular problem.
Now that example you mentioned, was it Pasadena?
Yes.
That example, is the county looking to try to do more of that kind of activity in the hotter areas, according to the numbers we see here, like in the Valley and South LA? And
yes, the answer to that is yes, but with the limitation that we have 16 program staff for the entire county of 12 million, and there are about 30 spots in the county where we've recognized that there is a high level. So we can't. We have to be. We cannot go everywhere. In fact, we can only go into maybe one other place. And so we're looking at how we can assist those communities where we can actually invest full-time staff, but can support it in some ways by sharing the model, doing training and technical assistance.
But you just mentioned earlier that you actually are on occasion afforded a budget to actually advance some of these necessities that seems to be a necessity. What occurred in Pasadena it sounds like that needs to be duplicated in other areas. And by the way, for the record, when I talk about the valley, I'm not talking about the San Gabriel Valley. I'm talking
Right,
about the
San Fernando.
Valley.
Right.
In the city, we don't deal with the San Gabriel Valley, but in the
Right.
county, you do.
Right.
So in the San Fernando Valley, when I say valley. Now, that being the case, are you making the case to the supervisors that you need to have maybe 30 bodies if you have 30 hotspots?
I think the key word in your earlier sentence about getting program funding for our work is the word occasional.
Yeah.
Because we do ask and we do request it, but that has been hard to get. What we are getting right now is we're seeking funding from foundations to support the work, and so we're
That's not the right place to get funding. I
Well,
appreciate and I respect
we have
the
to-
fact
we
you
have-
have to get what you
yes.
get wherever you can get it.
Right.
But it's the institutionalized funding. For example, is the sheriff's department funded by the county's general fund, or is it funded by outside resources such as foundations? The answer
Both.
is
both.
no.
But the bulk of it clearly is
90+%.
general fund.
The basis of what they do, if they add other aspects of their core responsibilities, it is funded by the county general fund and or grants directly to the county, right?
Yes, we absolutely
Right?
agree that.
My point is this. My point is this.
Mm-hmm.
All too often, the new departments within the city, the county, the state, across the country, all too often when we marginalize ourselves in our efforts and our willingness to fight for those funds, the formal funds, because we see ourselves competing with the traditional departments, like the police department within the city, for example, or the fire department, or park and recs, or what have you, because they've been institutionalized. They're formally part of our budget process and processes. Same with the county. In the county, you have the sheriff's department. For example, in a round figure, to the nearest 1,000, how many sheriffs do we have in the county? Anybody know? To the nearest 1,000.
I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000?
Okay, six or 7,000? Okay. And when it comes to probation officers, to the nearest 1,000.
Pardon me?
Probation officers, to the nearest 1,000. Anybody have an idea? Anybody in the room have an idea?
But not enough. No, the ratio is pretty broad between the number of
Yeah,
probationers.
but the thing is, it's unfortunate that you would defend the probation department.
No, I'm
by
not
saying
defending
that.
it. I'm
Because
just-
the bottom line is, I don't think they're defending you when somebody asks, well, hey, do these guys over there working on the hate crime issue, do they have enough bodies? They're like, I don't know, I don't care, give us more probation officers, right?
I think
We certainly agree with you that we can definitely use, and it's critical that we have more funding and support.
What I'm encouraging you to do, because you have responsibilities that cover the city of Los Angeles, what I'm encouraging you to do is to please not marginalize or discount your responsibilities when you know that the budget is tough, when you know that everybody's taking cuts. With all due respect, the city of Los Angeles gave everybody cuts except for the police department, the fire department did get a little bit, but the police department did not get cuts. Everybody else did. It frustrates me, and I voted for it. So don't get me wrong. We do what we do.
Right.
But we cannot not fight for the resources that we believe need to be designated and dedicated for the vast majority of responsibilities that we have. We're not monolithic in our efforts. We are somewhat monolithic when it comes to crime, in the sense that county of Los Angeles, city of Los Angeles, city of, county of, all over the place, we're somewhat monolithic because we put 90+% of our resources into the suppression-oriented aspect, and we do not put any more than an accumulated effect of 10% of our resources. I wish we could get to 10%. We're more likely 3%. Whether you're the county or the city or what have you, my point is, I encourage you to please, when you see that you have 30 hotspots and you see the success in one area with what you've been able to do not discount yourself.
Oh, absolutely, I appreciate what you're saying, and certainly welcome your support in helping that happen too. Because
If you only get 15 bodies, please put them within the city of LA first.
Of course. I just wanted to note that in Robin's tenure as executive director, and I'm just completing my 2 years in the county, that the commission has doubled in size and is one of the largest, if not the largest, in the nation. And so while our staff of 25 certainly is a mere small percentage of what we need for the county of LA, including the largest city, which is the city of Los Angeles. Under Robin's leadership, the staff has doubled. We've added new initiatives. They're program staff. They're not consultants merely on policy. And so our staff, in addition to doing research and reports and policy, are implementing programs with very limited funds and almost no support staff. And this is the situation we find ourselves, but we are the largest commission in the country, and Robin works both
But
with the
with all due
state.
respect, you're the largest county by population, and you dwarf the second largest county in the country.
No, but even if you were to compare some state, commissions and such, or cities that are of similar size. But yes, I think you're right. I mean, I think that you're right fundamentally in that, and we don't miss that point. But what we have succeeded by is to prevent cuts against us. We didn't take any cuts in this last budget. I mean, at least not in terms of staff. So, but yes, there's no argument there with us, and we certainly will work with you in trying to strengthen.
And recent new hires have been with expertise in this area. And so we've had to, as we've added new staff, we've added experts. Fidel Rodriguez, for example, recently joined our staff to work in this area of racialized gang violence prevention. And so it's becoming more, we're giving more attention to it, but we're working with communities, the gay and lesbian, LGBT community, the interfaith communities, that all believe that the priorities of conflict and tensions merit our attention as well. And so we're moving in a direction of placing more emphasis here, but unfortunately we get staff with very few resources to match.
Well, the dialogue that I had with you over the last 15 minutes is encouragement. Please don't take it in any way that I'm either upset or disappointed, or no, that's not it at all. You've been subjected to a mindset, a government mindset. I'm not saying your own mindset, but you've been subjected to a government mindset where the answer first and foremost is resources toward law enforcement, and then after that everybody has to deal with the crumbs. But with all due respect, more and more, thank God, we have people at the heads of law enforcement who are admitting that they can't go it alone. They need to be complemented by resources going toward other aspects of how to integrate prevention, intervention in the model of how we're going to bring crime down.
And just so you know, council member, that we're almost like broken records. That whenever we're speaking to within the county family, we're always emphasizing the fact that suppression alone is not going to solve this. We need a much greater investment in prevention and intervention. That we sounded out in all different levels of the county. I think that it's a battle that we continually struggle with, and we're certainly always looking for ways that we don't get marginalized, that we can get the kind of support that really we know is needed. And it's not just us, because we're not the only ones who do the prevention intervention work, but we know that it's critical for non-law enforcement agencies and community-based agencies to play a bigger role in all of this.
Well, unfortunately, there are political titans that when they sound like a broken record, they tend to get better results than agencies like yours. For example, when a sheriff says, you can't cut my budget by $172 million. What are you, crazy? I'm going to have to let criminals out on the street early, et cetera, et cetera. And before you know it, when the fight is over, maybe they took a $30 million haircut. And yet you may be talking about a measly $2-3 million to implement a program that has had a tremendous effect, and then your voice isn't even heard. And then your funding line item doesn't even get on the table. That's one of the things that I'm just trying to remind you, as a former budget chairman myself, as someone who saw that when in my last year in the legislature, when the budget started to turn on us in California, the law enforcement didn't stop coming. They sang the same song during good times or bad times. And they expressed themselves, they demanded, but I literally had to call institutions that I cared about, organizations that were doing preventative work, who had very small line items in the state budget. And I would say, how come you haven't come by? We're going to close down the budget pretty soon. Do you want your $500,000 in the budget? Do you want your $1 million like you got last year? And they say, yes, but I understand you're going to have to cut us. Law enforcement never said, oh, we understand you're going to have to cut us. They'd say, don't cut us. You can't do that to us. It's going to have a detrimental effect on the communities that you care about. So don't cut us at all. And yet I had organizations submitting to, they were actually making the case that they understood they needed to be cut. I warn you, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, we appreciate your breadth of experience and your leadership on this issue. So I certainly, believe me, that's something we rarely agree to. Obviously, we have to accept cuts when we're given, but that's not what we go in with. We go with requests for more resources.
And we can't do this work without city-based human relations commissions.
Absolutely.
They are our partners, and the City of Los Angeles Human Relations Commission is certainly one of our most important partners in this work. And we're seeing all of the city commissions being cut slowly, which puts a lot of pressure on us.
Always speak up. Always remind us how sophisticated this effort is. Always remind us that you need consistency with your partners at other levels of government. That statement you just made is very important for this committee because we need to be reminded that we're part of, this is a partnership.
Yes.
And then don't worry about sounding like a broken record. Just worry about going broke. There are institutions involved in these matters that they never worry about going broke. They never worry about not getting resources. They never worry about them having to cut their department in half or cut their department by 30%. They never worry about that. They don't. And they're at the front of the table.
Right.
Well, we worry about not going broke as well as not being broken, and those partners are being broken away from us, and so it makes us less able to do this work if our partners are being broken off as well. So being broke and being broken are equal concern to us.
Mm-hmm. Now the Joint City and County Juvenile Justice Task Force. I think it's wonderful that that's happening or what have you. Now at the same time, what can we do as a city to make sure that we properly complement that? I just introduced the motion yesterday to remind all of our city departments that they need to report back and tell us how they're complementing that. What can you tell us from your vantage point?
I think that that's absolutely a positive move to ensure that the entire apparatus of city governments, all the agencies that can contribute and support it, do. I think it's important to also perhaps send the message to the school district. That there needs to be that kind of support coming from the school district. They need to recognize it as an important model that needs to be supported. And I think it's also important to send that message to the county officials as well. You need to let them know that that's something that is valued by the city, and that the partnership is appreciated and supported, and that you want to see more of this.
What are some of the weaknesses that exist today in that partnership, in that task force? And are you engaging with the mayor's office of the City of Los Angeles? They now have a new department within the mayor's office called the Gang Reduction and Youth Development.
Right. That's headed by Jeff Carr.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There in the San Fernando Valley as well as in the Harbor Gateway, we are engaged in trying to help to get more resources to support the efforts and to be able to ultimately, institutionalize those efforts for the long haul, because we know it's not going to be changed in overnight. And really to make them models so that they can be replicated, they can show the impact. And there also there's the challenge of evaluation, because it's very important to demonstrate to people that the impact is real and to measure it in order to be able to get support for replicating in other places. And so the work with the city and the probation department and the nonprofits and the service planning area council of the San Fernando Valley. That's critical. We are hoping by honoring it, we help to get more support for its work, as well as to where we can have any influence in funneling any county resources to that effort. So, for example, Pacoima is now a focus of the county, and that's a
But
great
the
opportunity.
The pilot type program activity going to be going on there, right?
Correct. And it's going to be similar to what they did in Florence Firestone, where a number of county departments are directed to really pay special attention and support the efforts there. And I think that is a great opportunity for us to really show that a community can be turned around. One of the things that is really challenging is that we don't have anywhere in this county where we can point to and say, this level of gang violence has really been turned around in a deep, meaningful way because we've never anywhere focused enough resources to make that happen. So that would be such a breakthrough, and it would change the whole, I think, sentiment in the public about that this is something that is not a problem that cannot be solved. It is, and it just requires a change in priorities and resources and an adequate investment in believing that our young people are worth it. That and our work with Harbor Gateway, and also to the extent that Florence Firestone, which is another area of county support, there are neighboring areas in which LAPD and the city are affected, and by coordinating the work, we can be more effective in addressing the needs of those communities, and sometimes that doesn't always happen. So we're starting here, with Juvenile Justice Task Force, Harbor Gateway, and hoping those get strengthened as we look towards also how the high level of violence in Florence Firestone can also be supported by our partnerships with neighboring communities.
Well, I appreciate your report. I apologize. I have to close down the committee. Is there anything in particular you'd like to show me? I would just point out that, we have data here broken down by LAPD bureaus that with something that we hope in meeting with the mayor's office, which we actually will be doing with part of their staff, that this can be, operationalized, that it can be turned into some policy actions, and some information on Harbor Gateway as well. And, we look forward to the opportunity to working on our strategic priorities in line with not only the city's Human Relations Commission, but all parts of LA City government to be able to advance the work that we're all here for. So I just want to, again, thank you for your leadership. Thank you I look forward to, our agencies and governments working together even more effectively. And I'm hopeful that in the coming years, with the momentum that's been created, that we can continue to persist despite the many obstacles to really see some increased, massive investment that we need in our communities. Well,
I just wanted to just pointing out, these are, what we talked about in terms of our county-city partnerships. I didn't mention the Network Against Hate Crime, in which LAPD, will have their officers come and be educated oftentimes about what's going on in the county. And we just mentioned but didn't talk about the partnerships we have with 7 community-based organizations. But that's it.
Well, just understand when my intent and when I wrote the Shift Cardenas Act, when it came to the juvenile justice portion of that, it was my intention that commissions like yours would be much more involved in the decision-making of how those resources should end up being utilized within each county. It's unfortunate that certainly in our county, it seems like the probation department is the elephant in the room and the big 8,000-pound gorilla that is dictating how those resources are going to be utilized. But hopefully there can be some improvements on that legislation. It's not etched in stone, and it can be changed. And if it does, I would really like to see that someone formally recognize the fact that that money was not intended for law enforcement dictatorship on that money. It was intended for community-based type funding and activity. So with that, are there any public comment cards on this item? We're now on item number 1. Any public comment cards? I don't see any here before me. Seeing and hearing none, public comment on this item is now closed. With that, I'd like to make a request to the County Commission on Human Relations that you, if you could please afford us the opportunity to receive a semi-annual reporting and dialogue as we did today to this committee and the body of the Council of Los Angeles. And if we could do that, covering specifically whatever issues you think are relevant, also the hate crime report as you've done today, and also the Juvenile Justice Task Force, to remind us how we're doing and perhaps some recommendations of how we could do a better job.
We'd be glad to do
of
that.
working together.
Thank you very much, Council Member.
Okay. And with that, this committee will instruct LAPD to provide the committee with an incident report form that shows the different categories, such as crimes that are gang-related, gang-associated, or any other categories that are used, including hate crimes. So with that, if you'd like clarification, if the department would like clarification, they could talk to Michael with my office, De La Rocha, and we could clarify that request of the instruction to the LAPD. And with that, it'll be my minority report of this committee that this motion be adopted and moved forward. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here who'd like to speak to general public comment to this committee? I do not have any general public comment cards before me at this committee. Seeing and hearing none, this committee is now adjourned. Thank you all very much.